Traders, how are you? With Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. We have cities in Germany turning off the hot water and even shutting off city lights and fountains and all those kinds of things. The Fed obviously was a huge bit of news. We have, markets surging around the world, and we even have Russia cutting off more gas supplies to other countries in Europe. Let's get started. We need to go a little bit into history to explain what happened this week. Biggest piece of news was the Fed being the United States Central Bank, announcing that it wasn't going to raise interest rates as aggressively as before. This has a significant amount of repercussions. I always do the Spanish videos first, so I always think it's Spanish when I do the videos in English. Repercussions is the word I'm looking for. Repercusiones, if you guys are wanting to learn how to speak Spanish. So one is the inflation issue, which is affecting all of us, right? And we also have the expectation of what's going to happen with the markets. So we're going to go back. This amazing economic story goes back to 1998, 1999, when we had the dot-com bubble burst. The techcom.com bubble burst. Essentially, we had a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management, which wasn't doing what it was supposed to, as a lot of these, corruption bureaucrats get into, but essentially it failed. What happened was, since it was a huge hedge fund that had its tentacles throughout the financial system, the central bank in the United States, instead of just letting it fail, which is what normal capitalistic society would do. That's why I say that the reason why we don't have things working right now is because we don't live in a capitalist society anymore, right? But instead of letting it fail, they bailed it out. What did they do? They talked to banks around the world, in Europe and the United States, and then they all bailed out this hedge fund. So now the toxic debt and the toxic situation that this hedge fund had in its books, it went up now to the financial system, banks. That's where we had the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. What happened then? They didn't let the system fail. What did they do? They bailed out the entire financial system. What did they start doing? They started literally buying assets. They just flipped a switch, started printing money, right? Just created money out of thin air. And then they lowered the interest rates to the lowest in recorded history. What does that do? Interest rates are super important because it supports the housing market. In the United States, anywhere between about 17 to 19% is the housing market of the economy, construction, all of that stuff. In China, remember that 70%, 70, of the wealth of the billions of people they have in China is real estate. Right. So obviously the United States central bank doesn't affect the Chinese central bank, but you guys get my drift. So it's a huge chunk of the economy. Car loans, you guys that are borrowing money to start businesses, credit card debt. If they raise the interest rates, which is happening now, people cannot spend as much money because the cost of everything goes up. So by reducing the cost of everything, essentially, we created this massive bubble. And that's the situation that we get to today. Now that we have inflation, now that all that money that we printed is starting to work its way into the system, and that's why we're having this inflation, now they're starting to raise the interest rates to be able to try to tame inflation. The thing is that they're not raising interest rates as fast as the inflation rate, which means that they're half-assing it. Excuse my French. Right? They're literally just kind of, let's just kind of play with it. They're not really putting it to rest like they did in the 80s with Volcker, where the interest rates were literally jacked up to 20% to get it under control. So, and the reason why they can't do that right now is because of the debt that we have. We're literally $30 trillion in debt. We're spending $1 billion a day to service the debt in the United States. And if they continue to increase the interest rates, the debt that expires that we have to renew is just going to explode the amount of money that we have to pay for the debt. So it's literally damned if you do, damned if you don't. Damned if you do, because the inflation is not going to get under control, and the debt, servicing the debt, is going to increase, and then damned if you don't, because then we're just not going to control inflation and it's going to continue to get out of control, right? So that's kind of the dynamic of what's going on. So by the Fed saying that they're not going to increase the interest rates as aggressive as they initially thought they were going to, that creates a completely different expectation of what's going to happen with the economy. What does that mean? They're not going to they're not going to cut the increase or the expansion of the economy. They're not going to hurt it as much. What happens? We had a huge run in stocks. Precious metals exploded as well. And in addition to that, we had other markets that went down. So markets in the US, very, very positive. In addition to that, in Europe, markets exploded as well. Italy taking the crown there at 5.62%. Let me know if you guys like that explanation, because a lot of times you guys don't, I've seen in the comments that you guys want me to be able to put these dots together. And that's why I do these videos for you every week. And obviously, Conspiracy Marcello has to make an appearance, right? We'll get to that here in just a moment. European markets, as I mentioned, mostly higher. Latin American markets, mostly higher as well. The Merval in Argentina went up over 7%. You guys should see now the Brazilian markets there. I leave it there for the guys that process the videos. Africa and the Middle East, mostly positive outside of Nigeria, which was negative 3%. And then Asia and Australia, the far east, well positive as well. Bitcoin and crypto news, we've had a great surge in crypto. Bitcoin, in addition to Ethereum, all the cryptos, Bitcoin is up 6.42% to just over 22,400 this week. There was a bit of news where Tesla, during its earnings reports, advised everybody that they sold 75% of their crypto holdings. Crypto majority being Bitcoin. They didn't sell any other Doge. In addition to that, Coinbase is down 21% on Tuesday alone after the SEC, which is a regulatory body in the US government, decided that they're going to start investigating, probing to make sure that they didn't offer unregulated securities. Their shares are down over 75% this year. And in commodities, ready for Conspiracy Marcello? You guys ready? Thousands of U.S. cattle are being buried and dumped in a Kansas landfill. If you guys remember when that weird story where the cattle just literally died overnight supposedly because of the heat. The temperatures topped over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius in southwest Kansas. And in addition to that, we have a situation where beef prices are probably going to increase a lot more due to the fact that in Texas, we have farmers that are literally liquidating their entire cattle herd. They're literally just getting rid of them all because of the droughts that we're having, in addition to the extreme heat and also temperatures that we're getting. Ground beef alone in June in the United States went up by 9.7%, and the total inventory of cattle has been reduced by 2% since July 2021. Ready for Conspiracy Marcello? I think they're doing it on purpose because obviously we should all eat crickets. We should all eat bugs. It's great protein. I mean, come on, guys. It's great. In Canada, they already started putting that cricket stuff in the mecato. That's how you say it in Spanish. The bags of chips and those kind of things that you get, just kind of snack food. That's what mecato means in Spanish. In case you guys ever need to use the word snack food in Spanish, it's called mecato. Russia surpassed Saudi Arabia as the largest crude oil supplier for China over the last 2 months due to the Western sanctions. Remember that China is the biggest importer of oil in the world. The Biden administration is going to sell an additional 20 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The SPR is now down to its lowest level since 1985. And remember, he sold it to that group that China supports. He essentially sold it to China because he's trying to help the United States and consumer. It's like we're literally getting just hit from every angle. U.S. crude up this week over 4%, went up to 98.62. Brent went up 0.74% to $103.97. The reason why we've had this situation where gas prices and oil has gone down a little bit over the last few weeks is because of the declining demand vis-a-vis the recession, although don't call it a recession because obviously we're going to change the name now of how we define things so it doesn't look bad. So, he's trying to take the credit for it when it's not really the case. Russia has cut off gas to the country of Latvia after cutting off the gas to Poland, Finland, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Hanover, which is a city in Germany, is shutting off its hot water to all of its citizens. They're also shutting off lighting in spotlights at public monuments and turning off fountains, which is probably going to be a more frequent theme in Europe as Russia continues to cut off all of the gas supplies. And precious metals, as I mentioned, with that good history that I gave you guys in the beginning, up for the week, because obviously if they're not going to increase the interest rates as fast, it means that the dollar isn't going to have as much demand, which means that the value of the dollar went down, which means that everything in the value of dollars, which is literally everything in the world, goes up in value. Gold went up 2.26% to 1767, and my favorite, silver, went up 9.53% to $20.45. Remember a few weeks ago, I'm not a trading advisor. This is for educational purposes only. I can't give you any legal advice or trading advice or anything like that. But remember a few weeks ago, I said silver was financial and banking news. McDonald's is advising that their customers are trading down and buying value items as combos are increasingly unaffordable to the consumers. Wait for this. Remember that the inflation report was at 9.1%. Remember that even though if they were calculating the same inflation at the same way that they did in 1980, the actual inflation rate would be over 18%. An executive said that food and paper costs at McDonald's have gone up 12 to 14% for the year. And it warned that there's a lot of macro uncertainty over the future results as well. So you can see even the numbers from McDonald's are higher than the actual inflation rate that the government's providing. Russia and China are brewing up a challenge to the dollar dominance by creating a new reserve currency with BRICS. BRICS was once a coin term for the future of all these economies being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. South Africa, not so much anymore. But they're now trying to create a new world reserve currency where people can buy this reserve currency, which is based on the basket of currencies of these countries. The IMF is also saying that it expects 2022 inflation at a rate higher than before. I never give you guys these stupid numbers that these global organizations report because they always end up changing them and they're never correct. Remember, before the 2008 crisis, the Ben Bernanke, which was the head of the Federal Reserve at that point, said, oh, no, housing market is fine. Nothing's going to happen. And then we had the literal crash like a day later, a week later. Inflation in Argentina, in the Socialist Republic of Argentina, is up 64% over the 12 months. The forecast is that it's going to get to 90% by the end of 2022. How do you like that new economics that we're living through now? We literally voted for the exact same socialism that they're living in Argentina. And to combat inflation, the central bank has interest rates at 42.5%. Can you imagine that in the United States? Australian inflation hit a 21-year high in Q2. Evidence is growing as well that the Fed is falling behind on inflation because remember, if the inflation rate is at 9.1% and the United States Central Bank is putting rates they raised it 0.75% to 2.25 to 2.5%, that means that there's a gap between the two, which means that inflation isn't going to get any better because they're not putting interest rates higher than what the inflation rate actually is. Now, a good thing is that we're literally in a recession. So the technical definition for a recession is that we've had 2 quarters of decreased growth or contraction. The first quarter of this year, the first 3 months of the year, contracted by 1.6%. The second quarter went down by 0.9. If I'm not mistaken, I have my numbers somewhere here, but I lost them. But the government now is changing the definition of the recession because they don't want to look bad, and we have elections at the end of this year. Nearly 30% of Generation Z, which are also called Zoomers, are permanently living with their parents due to the inflation squeeze. Ladies, look for a man that lives with the parents. It's the new... I was going to say a joke, but I completely lost it. Generation Z is the age range between 18 to 25. In a study by Credit Karma, 40% of Gen Z are now relying on credit cards and other forms of credit to pay their purchases, which is obviously because of the increasing inflation. In political news, the Lula, also known, which is a leader of the Brazilian Socialist Party, is trying to drum up the troops to be able to beat Bolsonaro, which is the current president of Brazil, which is not a socialist and not a leftist. He says that the only way to recover the economy is through income redistribution, which has never gone well in history. Biden officially has COVID for a second time as well. Remember that he's had 4 jabs, not just 2. So don't forget to get your thing in your arm because obviously it saves lives. Conspiracy Marcella. Economic news, we're just going to leave that right there so they don't censor the channel like they shut down the previous channel that we had. US is officially in a recession. I mentioned that. Yeah, I gave you the numbers correctly. I just found the numbers. Corporate news, Tesla, as I mentioned you guys before, sold 75% of its Bitcoin. I'm not going to get into every single number of all the numbers, but overall, Walmart said their numbers weren't up to par with analysts. They're saying that they're going to start discounting things, especially apparel, which is one of their biggest profit items because consumers are not doing well. Google, they smashed the expectations of the revenue. It's not as good as a year ago when they went up by 62%, but they still went up 13%. Microsoft turns its slowest revenue growth since 2020, and Facebook has the first decline in revenue for the first time ever. So you can see that a lot of these big corporations, which are some of the biggest in the world, are not really having the best numbers that they used to have before, which is another indicator that we're not doing well economically. Shares of Amazon rose over 10%. Their revenue growth was on par. They did really, really well. And Apple had solid numbers as well. They went up 3.28%, their shares, after their stock has gone up almost 17% over the last month. Spirit Airlines has officially terminated their agreement to merge with Frontier Airlines. After that, they literally, the next day, it seemed like, made a deal with JetBlue, which was an all-cash bid. They bought it for $3.8 billion, creating the 5th largest air carrier in the United States. Still has to pass the regulatory scrutiny. And the 3 largest Western oil companies, which is Exxon, Chevron, and not Shell. Exxon, Chevron, I have it written here. Forgot the third one. Give me a second. Well, I'll have to get back to you guys on the third one. I'm sure one of you guys will put it in the comments for me. They had record profits in the second quarter. Obviously, this is due to the record increase in the oil prices. Exxon, which is the largest U.S. oil company, went up by $17.9 billion of profit in quarter 2, which is the highest ever. In technology, baffled scientists, I thought this was really interesting, discovered a perfectly aligned holes punched into the ground 1.7 miles below the surface of the ocean. It's 2.7 kilometers. You guys probably see the pictures there. Nature doesn't do straight lines. And remember, Atlantis, the name Atlantis, came from the supposed civilization that came from the Atlantic Ocean. Interesting, isn't it? China has approved a genuine biotech's HIV drug for COVID patients. What could possibly go wrong? And solar panels, according to a study done in Dorset, England, when temperatures reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius, have proved that solar panels are actually less efficient in higher temperatures despite the increased sunlight. World Health Organization, in an international news, declared the monkeypox a global health emergency. The emergency committee didn't reach a consensus, but the Tedros, which is the chief of the WHO, decided to go ahead and just make it an emergency. Cities across China are on red alert for the heat waves on Monday. Tens of millions of people are being warned to stay inside of their homes. Temperatures are going to reach 41 degrees Celsius, 106 degrees Fahrenheit over the weekend in the eastern provinces of Shenzhen and Fujian. Hopefully I said that correctly. And the Cuban capital of Havana, 20% of the population lives there. 11.2 million people are going to start having blackouts, planned blackouts for 4 hours a day due to the fact that they're having problems with their electrical grid like everybody else. An unusual facts this week, getting hotter in Greenland. It hit 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's about 15 degrees Celsius, if you guys want to hit me up on the comments there. 10 degrees above normal. It melted 18 billion tons of the ice sheet in 3 days. The problem is not only the increase in the level of the oceans, but the problem is also the current in the ocean, which brings the heat to Europe. Remember that Europe is on a higher elevation than places, for example, like New York. And so imagine the cold winters that we have in places like New York City or Pennsylvania hitting a much northern climate like Spain, France, Germany. Due to the fact, the reason why they don't have such cold winters is because of the ocean current And obviously, if that cold water hits the current and they don't have that warm water that heats up Europe anymore, the winter can be a lot worse because obviously Russia's shutting off the gas to Europe. And according to an Australian miner in Angola, a rare pink diamond has been found. It's the largest recovered in the last 300 years. They say that only 1 in 10,000 diamonds are colored pink, nicknamed Lulo Rose. And the second largest U.S. Mega Millions jackpot has somebody won over $1 billion, $1.33 billion, and the third largest jackpot in U.S. lottery game history. That's the news for this week, guys. Don't forget to subscribe. If you have any questions, hit up the comments with hashtag Ask Marcello. And don't forget to, the peppers are right.